Welcome to the Bottom Line Podcast with Nicholas Kuzmich, where we discuss what matters most, the bottom line, featuring the top minds in their industry. Now, let's get started.
Hey everybody, Nicholas Kuzmich here from the Bottom Line Podcast, where I connect with industry leaders and what I like to say as well, industry sleepers, to discuss what matters most, and that is the bottom line. And of course, when we're talking about the bottom line, we're not just talking about bottom line profits, which matter, but also when I say the bottom line, I'm talking about the bottom line as in what matters most to individuals. What is the bottom line of life? So past guests include people like Arash Vasugi, founder of Voss Coaching, who's actually Bob Proctor's successor, James Lawrence, the Iron Cowboy, and so many more, all of which you can listen to however you listen to podcasts. This episode, like most, has brought to you by H2H Media Group. That's a company that I founded and I started where we help high-ticket business owners get qualified leads without funnels, and close to 2 decades now have generated close to $1 billion in collective revenue, because the question I always ask is, you wouldn't sell a McLaren like you would a Mazda, would you? To learn more, go to nicholaskuzmich.com. Brad, welcome to the podcast.
Nick, what an amazing start. I love the energy. I'm already so intrigued by just everything you just said. So despite our conversation today, I've already got some ideas in my mind. I got to go to your website and spend some time there and just get to know better some of the things that you're doing. Because obviously you're, meeting you through Mastermind Talks, that's a gathering of just, fascinating people in general. Yes. So you're there for a reason. And as I've gotten to know you, there's always like your layers of an onion. I keep peeling a layer back and wow, discover something more fascinating. Oh man, this is really interesting. So,
well, that's same for you, which is why I'm super stoked about having this conversation. But why don't we start? Because like I'm not known for liking to read personal bios of people as an introduction to them, especially people I know. So I want you to do the hard work instead of me, and I'll flip it on you and say, hey, if you had an elevator pitch, and look, you could go as long or as little as you like, because I know it's going to spawn some more questions. But if you had to kind of just start with, well, who are you? What do you do? What are you up to now? Go as deep or as shallow as you want, because we're just going to roll even deeper after the fact anyways. But just as a high level overview for people who are just tuning in.
Sure. Well, I'll keep it high level. So first of all, and I do it in this priority on purpose, because this is how I kind of have arrived at this season of my life in terms of priority. But I start off, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a founder, I'm an author, I'm a coach. And I happen to live in what I believe is the best place on planet Earth, British Columbia, where you and I get to do life together, which is amazing. But I didn't start out here. I started off in the prairies of Canada. That's where I was born and raised, which is really known for oil and agriculture, although that was not the path I was going, because I came from a long line of chiropractors. There was like 3 generations ahead of me of people who were chiropractors. And so this is what I was supposed to do with my life. But life is what happens when you're busy making plans. And so that plan took a detour. I didn't go down, even though I started in school there. I ended up going into business, start off as a toy guy of all things. I became the real world Santa Claus. I was in toy distributing, and for close to 30 years, I created toys and I shipped them across the country initially, and then that went globally. The company I co-founded called Basic Fun. You probably don't know that company, but you'd know brands like Tonka, Care Bears, Connects, Lite-Brite, things like that. And I tell people, over my career, I've literally sold billions of playthings to every continent on the planet. So that was an interesting journey in my life. And for 30 years, that was awesome. I exited that company in 2018. I tell people, and I'll tease this out, it was a sudden exit with a soft landing. So, and by the way, my journey through the toy business, as you already know, it's had some high highs and some low lows. I went bankrupt not just once, but more than once, just because I'm a slow learner. But that was a part of my journey of what I need to do to learn to become who I am today. But today I'm the co-founder of a couple clean tech companies, Pela and Lomi, and I'm work with Matt Bertulli, who we both met through MMT, another amazing connection. I'm thankful to Jason Gaynor for putting that together.
Right.
And with those businesses, we tell people they are missions with companies. We literally believe in creating a waste-free future. We believe that's possible, and we believe these companies are part of that solution. And honestly, my overall belief is that I think business can be the greatest force for good in the world today, when you have the right motives for focusing on how do you build value in people on the planet. But but my life is a series of happy accidents. You never could, you can connect the dots looking backwards, but looking forward, it would have seemed crazy. And while I don't have an MBA in business, I tell people I have a PhD in DUMB from the School of Hard Knocks. And most of that was captured in my book, which is really where I just said it. I tell people it's not a to-do book, it's a what not to do book. So you can learn from the wisdom of my wounds because I've made a lot of mistakes in life. But that's where we tend to learn, right? Mastery is found on the mountaintop of mistakes. So I've spent a lot of time on that mountaintop, and maybe that's a good place to stop.
Yes, and such a good place to launch 1,000,001 questions. But before we do that, I always like to start this with actually a conversation starter box from our good friend Jason Gaynard.
Cool.
I have not previously picked it. I don't know where it's going to go. I'm going to pick a random conversation starter kind of question because Jason believes good conversations are started by good questions. So are you okay if I pull something from the box and see where that takes us?
Let's go.
Okay, let's see what we have today. Today, what do you want to do more of for the next 365 days, let's say? And what do you want to do less of in the next year?
In the next year, I want to spend more time in this, in conversations with people who care and that matter. I think it was Eleanor Roosevelt said that, small minds talk about others, average minds talk about events, but, the great minds, they talk about ideas and the quality of your conversation depends on the quality of people. So spending time with people who are like-minded, who are, trying to be the best and brightest version of themselves and having conversations about what that looks like and unraveling some of the mystery. Because for all of us who are on this journey, we know it's a terminal event. And along the way, we never arrive. It's a work in progress as we're traveling along, but it's hopefully iterations that get us closer to that best and brightest version of self. So more of this is definitely what I would say I want to do more of. What do I want to do less of? Fly commercial?
I agree. Yes, especially these days.
Yeah. And I mean, it's a price, it's a first world problem. Like I understand that, that seems very trite to say, but I mean, where we live in the world, getting anywhere is not easy. It's great to live here, but it's got friction. Yeah. So I like friction-free living and, commercial flying from this spot in the world is never much of a joyous event. So,
and not that you would, but you are still a pilot. I know you had your pilot's license. Are you still allowed to get behind the cockpit of a certain size airplane and take someone in it, or has that expired? Like, what's the situation there?
Yeah, no, I'm still a pilot.
Okay.
Albeit COVID put some disruption in that. I'm a private pilot, have my single engine rating, I got my float rating, and I was in the process of getting my twin when COVID hit. And so that obviously put a hamper in plans. I just actually got in the plane a month ago when I was back in Florida. I'm going to put my hand up to say my landings were not my best.
Were you solo or was there someone in there with you?
Well, you have to get every 24 months, you have to get a recertification, like just that you are, back in the saddle. You have to and at my age, you have to get a health certificate every 24 months as well. So I did my certification. Somebody was sitting next to me and, one of the landings, I remember the commentary had some explicitives, but anyways, it was fine. I'm here to tell you about it today. So it must have been not too terrible.
I love it. Well, I mean, Brad, in our circles and some of the adventure stuff that we do, and we'll get into that in just a second. You're also known for some hard landings. So we'll talk about that. Where I want to kind of start, and you alluded to this already. We live in Kelowna. You also have a home in Florida, but you spend most of your time here in Kelowna, British Columbia. I want to first start by saying, and I know I told you this story, but I think it's worth sharing for everybody who's listening. You're one of the reasons why I moved here. We were thinking, literally, it was the middle of COVID. We wanted to stretch our legs and we couldn't travel because COVID had the travel restrictions on it. So where do we want to go? We were living in Toronto at the time, hopped on a plane and said, well, we have a couple of friends who live in Kelowna. I don't even know where that is or what it means. Seems like it's somewhere on the West Coast, but at least we know people there. So we hopped on a plane, we headed over. And we lived in your second home, your cottage there, which was nice. Thank you for doing that, which, by the way, we lived in there for a month as our first home here in Kelowna. So another thank you, and I appreciate that. In fact, I am drinking Bengal spiced tea because of the teas that you had in your cottage. And I was like, I love this stuff. And now it's actually part of my morning routine. But there's one instance in specific, because we had no anticipations, thoughts, or ideas, or even conceptions to move. I was born and raised 416 area code. I thought I was going to die 416. And you had taken us out on your wake surfing boat. And it was you, Kelly, myself, and Farron. And first, just being in nature on the lake, having that experience was phenomenal. And then as we're watching you guys, Kelly gets on the wake and is just ripping it, like just smile on her face like she does, and just tearing it apart. And it was in that moment where Farron and I were in the boat, and Farron turns to me and says two things. Number one, why are we waiting to live like this?
Hmm.
Because our mindset was always being, you work hard, hard, hard to one day earn the right to live how you want. Who knows when that time would come? There's a false finish line somewhere set way in the future. And like, all right. And so that was our mindset: work, work, work as hard as we can, as much as we can, so that one day we can enjoy life. And that question, just watching you guys, dawned on her and said, we don't have to wait. We could do this. And then the second question was, do you think we can live here? To which I turned around and said, I thought you would never ask. And then 5 weeks later, we ended up moving, and the rest, as they say, is history. So thank you for that as well. But you could live anywhere on the planet, should you choose to. You chose Kelowna. And I asked this partially like self-leading, because I kind of know the answer, but I'd love to hear it. Like, why Kelowna? What does that mean for you? What does that mean for the decisions you made in your life as to what's important? For the people who may be saying, well, I don't want to choose where I live where I live, and this is just what it is, and I'll take vacations and I'll do other things to satisfy that bug. Like, why did you choose to live here?
Yeah, great question. And thank you for the background story. And I will say that since you and Farron have moved here from Toronto, 416ers, this is very different than Toronto. Like,
Yeah, a
it
little bit.
is, the people that I know that typically coming from Toronto, they're awed by this place just because of the majesty and beauty, but they find it very intimidating because there is no real downtown scene. Life is very, very different here. It's about being interdependent with nature. Right? That if you live here, you are agreeing that I'm going to be outdoors and spending a lot of time in this very beautiful place.
Right.
And I've watched you two evolve like incredibly. Like, I look at how you've just embraced being here, and like I want to lean into this. So John Burroughs had this quote that I think of often. He says, into nature I go to heal my senses and soothe my soul. And for me, my church, where I've felt most connected to my creator, has really been in nature, being in mountains, around lakes, just being away. That's actually where I go to kind of just heal.
Yeah.
I can be very extroverted, but for the most part of my life, I'm an introvert. And, I'm an ambivert, meaning I default to being an introvert, but I can be extroverted for periods of times. But when I need to like actually recoup and re-energize, I got to go to nature. I got to get my bike and ride into nature. And so for my life design, British Columbia has everything. And it's not just in okay amounts, it's the best. Like, it's just the best. Like, the snow here is the best snow if you out enjoy winter pursuits. You get snow across Canada, as you know. Like, I had it in Alberta, it's happened in Ontario, but the quality of the snow here and the way you can utilize the snow here, it's just different, right? And then you go to the opposite season, you go, okay, the summer's here. I mean, it's epic. We get, hot summers, but with the lakes nearby, which actually makes it an incredible opportunity for growing incredible wine. And most people don't believe Canada makes great wine because they just don't understand how a place so far north can do that. But this lake effect we get here, we're just so blessed that we have the ability to do that. And we consume 90% of what we produce. So you got to come here to actually really enjoy it. And then all the other things that come along with that in terms of natural foods and just quality health and fresh air and fresh water. This place screams abundance.
Yeah.
It's a cornucopia of abundance. And I think for how I want to do life and in terms of outdoor pursuits and live at a high level in terms of the quality of life, I can imagine a better place for what I love to do.
I love that. There's two things you said there that I think are worth just digging a little bit into. Well, the main thing is you use the term life design. Can you expose that a little bit? Because everyone has this idea of lifestyle pursuits and life design. I find, and I'm learning to do this as I've moved out here and spent some time with you. There's my business and the roles I play and all that. And then there's the fun that I have where it's integrated lifestyle for you. It's not one or the other. It's not sometimes this, sometimes that. You seem to have been, and I can't imagine anything else, to be very intentional about how you design your life. Can you talk to us, about how and why that's important and some of the considerations you make when you're thinking about your life?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, so I'm going to be clear. There are different ages and stages of
Sure.
where you are in your
Right.
journey, and there are seasons, right? So I'm at a season in my life where, as a post-exit founder who's gotten new startups, I've been able to afford more time and intention around life design. But I think it doesn't matter where you are in your journey. Most people settle for, that's just the way we are as humans. Like
By
we
default.
Yeah, but yeah, like, so my book is really about play, and it's about the importance of play and how it's built into our humanity. And as young kids, if you think about kids, they're playful and everything's possible. There are no
Right.
limitations. There's no restrictions. Everything is possible. But as we get older and as we start to get the wear from the mud, the blood, and the flood of whatever we're doing in life, but we go against the grain, and it gets hard, and we make mistakes and we fail and we have self-worth issues and on and on and on, we start to settle for,
Yeah.
and we start to get to a place of complacency. And Ben Franklin said most people die at age 25.
Huh.
They just wait to 70 to get buried. And, so I think that revelation is that I don't care where you are in your journey, you need to have a vision for the future that's driven by hope. Because there's two things that motivate all human behavior. The hope of something better
Mm.
or the fear of loss. But the fear of loss is a greater motivator because it's the fight or flight thing that, it's kept us alive since we were cavemen. But it also becomes the default that most people gravitate to because it's easier. It's easier to be in scarcity mode and be afraid of change. And a lot of it comes from just issues with self-worth, right? Like,
Right.
am I worthy of that? But having a life design means I have a hope for the future. And hope is interesting because it's not something that can exist in the past. That's
Ah.
regret, right? It can't exist now because that's actually what's happening. It can only exist in the future. And it's your imagination believing in a better possibility for that future, which helps you create a design that you're not just tolerating for, not settling for. Because you
Mm.
don't get what you want in life, you get what you tolerate. And if
Right.
you just continue to tolerate things that are substandard, it eventually just leads into a life of malaise where you just numb out and eventually get to a place where I believe where there's lots of regrets.
I hope I love that. And it's true. You're very intentional about it. I hope I say this right. I sometimes mess it up. You taught me the term, is it topophiliac?
Yeah.
Can you explain that a little bit? Because I think it works with lifestyle design. I think it works with the reason you choose to live where you live, where I live. And it's a great consideration for most if they're willing to learn what that actually means.
Yeah, actually, I got the idea from Brad Feld. So he's the first one that said it. And I was like, oh, yeah, that just makes sense. But this idea that topophilia is the love of where you live,
Right.
right? It literally, if you just diagnose the Greek etymology of it, it's like topa is the map and philia is love. So I
Mm.
love where I live. And I created a group called the Topophiliacs, which is just a chat channel. And it's basically just to celebrate life here in the Okanagan.
Right.
Whether you're out wake surfing, whether you're out skiing, whether you're at a cool winery, it's sharing photos and ideas and inspiration to continue to encourage each other that we live in this incredible place of abundance. And so we want to encourage each other that this is make the most of it. Like you can make more money, but you can't make more time. It's the
Yeah.
most one scarce resource we all have. And kind of to what you said about like you and Farron were like, well, when are we going to do this? Like, why are we putting off life? Like, life is in session. This isn't the practice run. So let's get the most from it. Let's squeeze it dry for all the opportunity and potential can be. And wherever you are in life, I mean, you don't have to come to the Okanagan. We love this place.
Yep.
But, we have a place in Florida. We love that place too for different reasons. But wherever you are, hopefully you love where you live and you can celebrate it for all the potential and possibilities that are there
Mm.
that you can lean into to, again, become the best and brightest version of yourself. That's ultimately what we're trying to achieve. We want to be that version of ourselves that we know that is potentially there within us, right?
What, where would there are people say, there's a few key decisions you make in your life, who you marry being one of the top. It affects everything you do, et cetera, et cetera. I wouldn't have said this until I moved here. And this is not a pitch for Kelowna, and please don't move here. There's enough people here, like just stay away. But it wasn't until I moved here that outside of who do you marry and what are the, greatest priorities in your life. Thirdly, I found that where you choose to live has a significant impact on who you are as a person, how you operate in the world, your peace, your love. Where would you put that in the order of potentially most important decisions that you make, and whatever season you are in life?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if I've ever thought of it in terms of order, but I definitely think it'd be top five.
Yeah, sure.
Maybe even top three, based on, I agree with you. The most important is who you decide to marry with. That partnership for life, that's going to determine
So much.
exponentially the happiness and joy that you should expect in your life. Who you get in business with, which again comes
Right.
down to relationships. So I think it's the who questions that are really important. I think the why questions as well, right
Uh-huh.
behind that, right?
Right.
Like, what is your purpose that you were created for? What is the why that you are able to lean into the value you're creating, and feeling that there's harmony. And you used a word earlier, integration. Like, I don't really believe in work-life balance. I believe in work-life integration. It's about integrating all the different channels of your life into this woven masterpiece, this
Right.
tapestry that you're creating, right? But where you live, I mean, look, I appreciate my time in Toronto, right? It was 20 years, learned so much, met incredible people. It was, the crucible for where I built the back of my business, and it had to be based
Yeah.
upon, the type of business I was building. That being said, it is not friction-free living.
Right.
It's like, the thing that we talk about is that this place, we've made more friends and deeper connections in shorter time in being here only, I guess, 6 years now versus like the 20 years in Toronto. And part of that is not that the people in Toronto are worse. It just, the reality of living in Toronto is it's a grind. Like,
Yeah.
everywhere you go is hard to get to. And people at the end of the day, when they leave early in the morning, they get home late, they're wore out. They just don't have any capacity to really socialize in a meaningful way. And that's why we see a lot of an epidemic of loneliness as well. I think part of the reason,
Yeah.
not the only reason, but part of the reason. So I think choosing where you live that can be as friction-free as possible, that can increase your social engagement, which is, quite frankly, it's a key to living long,
Right.
right? It's one of the things, if you watch the blue zones, whether you prescribe or believe in all that or not, where you live according to that is very important to your vitality and longevity. So I think this place screams both.
Yeah. I didn't think I was a nature person, having been born and raised in Toronto. Um, uh, at the time of recording this, several weeks back, we went on a mountain biking trip. It was quite the adventure for me, being the more novice one in the group. But there was a situation on one of those first two runs, which were quite challenging for me. Everyone had bombed down the run, and I was left significantly behind, partially because it felt like it was a quadruple black diamond red line pro course, which I probably shouldn't have been on. And the grade of the trail was pretty significant. So I had ended up by default, not intentionally, being pulled back from the group by several minutes. So much so that when I had stopped, there was nobody around. I couldn't hear or see or feel. But the point of the story here was, and it goes back to something you alluded to before, rather than like stressing out about, oh, how do I catch everybody move? I just stopped for a second, and I realized I'm standing in the old growth forest and there's not a sound to be heard. It was like brutally deafening, yet so vibrant in life. And
Hmm.
I just had to stand there. I felt like I could have stayed there for hours, but I stayed there for probably like 5 to 7 minutes and just took it in. And there was just something that was therapeutic, healing, grounding, reconnecting with self and source. Like there is something, because I mean, there's something to say about like going on hikes and mountain bike rides and all that kind of stuff in nature, where you're chatting it up and trying to stay alive. There's another thing to just be.
Hmm.
And there's very few places in the world that allow that to happen. I think in a second, I'll probably ask you a little bit about some of your mountain biking and snow biking and all the endeavors you do, so much so that your family had to intervene and say, Brad, slow down a little bit. We want you to live longer than you think you can live. But I guess there's just something about well, actually, let's even go there, right? When someone from the outside observes Brad Pedersen living life, for some, they could almost say, wow, that's intimidating. Like, because for me, coming to know you, and I know this is toned down a little bit, but it feels like, there's one mode and it's full send. Now, I know that's not actually true, but it's the what oozes out of you is, I want to extract the most out of every experience. Were you born with that? Was that something that was cultivated or developed? And I guess thirdly is, how much of that has led to the business successes and the life successes? I know you had some downs, but how much of that is a actual trait that can be cultivated and used towards business, or is it just the DNA of Brad Pedersen and that's me and you don't have to be that way? But there's something fascinating is not the right word, beautiful about watching you live life. But what is that?
Well, I appreciate the insights and the compliments as how I'll take them. And you're right, I'm very intentional about, my motto is that I want to die young, but to do so as late as possible. So I want to live life to the full. Jim Rohn used to say, in life, you may not be able to do all you find out, but make sure you find out all you can do. And I believe in that. I believe that, I want to see the potential. And life for me begins on the edge of my comfort zone, pushing into places that I just haven't been willing to, or trying things. Sometimes I push too far. I've, a few broken bones we were talking about before the podcast.
Yeah.
And
more than a few, yeah.
So, I'd say how you do one thing is how you do everything. So,
Yes.
as you see me live in the outdoor pursuits that I enjoy, that risk-taking element actually showed up big time for me in the toy business. And quite frankly, the toy business is a lot of gambling. I tell people that, the typical profile of a toy entrepreneur would be like almost a perfect match for somebody who just is a junkie in Vegas. Like,
Wow.
you're
Yeah.
playing the odds, right? Because kids are fickle.
Right.
Things come, they go quickly. And when you get it right, it's high highs, or it's nothing. There's really no average good toy company. If you think about the number of epic like brands that have longevity in toys, you could number on two hands who those are. And that's, after, centuries
Yeah.
of toy making. So I think, part of it is the industry I came from. Part of it is that, pent up. I spent so many years of my life traveling the planet based on the age and stage I was of like that warrior stage of building your business and
Right.
being in the mud, the blood, and the flood of starting a startup and working crazy weeks and traveling around the world. And, I got my Air Canada million-mile
Million
jet.
mile.
And I tell people it's my badge of dishonor. It basically tells you how often I was away from my family. But, I got a cool little plane to, to commemorate it with. So I think part of it is this is the way I've always been an adventure kid. I was a bit of a mischievous kid. I remember I got the strap 3 times as a kid in grade school, and I don't do that anymore, but it gives you a sense that I was always kind of pushing the boundaries. I was not like
Sure.
doing bad stuff. Like I wasn't, smoking drugs in the boys' room or anything like that, but I was always kind of breaking the rules, testing the edges. And I remember that at home, and that's probably why I've got regular spankings as well at home. And it was kind of a part of my my upbringing, needing some curbing in terms of my growth. And yeah, I now want to make the most of life. I'm in my
Mm.
early 50s. Things now take longer to heal from. Uh, I feel the effects of things more, and it's created more urgency, quite frankly, that
Wow.
I don't have this endless, long timeline ahead of me. There is sort of a finality. I hope to live long, well,
Right.
right? And I think that we have a lot of hope today, but I also see, I've had peers in recent years who've passed away, and it's like kind of shocking, like, wow, somebody who I thought was healthy and fit and had it together, and they had a heart attack, or so you just can't take it for granted. So
Right.
I think my hope is that I want to live each day like it could be my last, but learn like I might live forever.
Wow.
And that'll continue to inform the way that I live by continuing to be open to learning and pushing the edges of my comfort zone and trying on new things.
Ooh. in the 20 minutes or so that we've been talking, um, I've heard more good, deep one-liners from yourself or quoting the Jim Rohns of the world and whatnot than I have in a lifetime of conversations with other people. I think Matt Bertulli sometimes jokes, one of our good friends here, your neighbor, and says, Brad is the most personally developed person I know. There is clearly a investment into your own development. What role does that play in all of life? And in context too, because I mean, we haven't even talked about your business yet, and I don't know if we even have time to get there, but massive highs of success, a post-exit founder, life is no longer about wealth building. It's more about preservation at this point. You get to enjoy the fruits of your labor ultimately. But there were also the downtimes. There were the two bankruptcies. There were the times that people don't like talking about. Is your outlook and emphasis and focus on personally developing, and I put that in quotes because it's a buzz term, but you don't treat it as a buzz term, it's real to you. Is that the result of these low lows and you just needed it to get you out? Or is having those things in your life prior to what allowed you to get through those things? And I guess where I really want to take it is, most people see life as the numbers in the bank account, the post-exit, this, that, the books that we read and all that, with a less emphasis on developing who we are as humans. So I just love you to comment on kind of all that, because again, I think if there's anyone to talk about that part, it would be you.
Well, thank you. Appreciate the compliment. And honestly, I don't look at it as that I've done anything extraordinary. I've done what I've needed to do to work through a bunch of difficult things. Personal development. So the question you asked is, did it come before or did it come after? And my
Right.
answer is both.
Ah,
It just changed, right? And I think the thing I would say is that, personal development for the sake of personal development is not what I prescribe to, and wouldn't be what I recommend. In fact, I would tell your listeners that is a form of active procrastination
sure.
often,
Or
right?
escapism even. Yeah.
Totally. You become a junkie. You read books, you listen to stuff, you do personal development, but until you start applying it, right?
Right.
It's like there's a difference between potential energy and kinetic energy.
Right.
They're both energy sources, but one is potential. Until you start applying it, it only becomes kinetic, only becomes something that actually is valuable. So I think it needs a balance between your, consumption versus creation quotient. And so for me, it's a part of my daily practice is
Yeah.
to spend time in personal development and growth, but it's also prescriptive to the season I'm in. So just reading a
Mm,
book is not necessarily the right strategy. It's what's the book you need to read at this moment in
right.
time.
Great point.
And actually, I would also say more important than we need to be instructed, we need to be reminded. What are the books that you've read that you haven't mastered that you should go back and re-review?
I love that.
One of the great insight for that is that so Stephen Covey's, Seven Habits was a book that's had huge impact on my life. But when it first came out, I read it because it was kind of like the in book.
The
There was
book.
like a
Yeah. The
bunch
book
of
to
books you
read.
should
Sure.
read. Yeah, so read the book, check mark, got it,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
like gold stars.
Yeah.
Um,
Next.
right, next. And a few years ago, both my kids independently, and this is one of the things I'm most proud of, my relationship with my kids. But they both came to me and said, "Dad, would you spend some time like mentoring us, spending some time?"
Wow.
Okay, which I feel incredibly grateful and privileged to be asked that because I know a lot of families that don't have that kind of connection with their kids. So
Right.
as a part of that, I was like, great, let's read some books and let's go back to books that I've read that I would recommend. And so one of the books I recommend was The Seven Habits, which I hadn't read probably in 20 years.
Yeah.
So read it with my son and and then I of course went through it and I was like, oh my gosh, this book is incredible. It's unbelievable. And then a year later, I read it with my daughter. So it's now been three times I've read it. And at the end of the reading with my daughter, I literally was like, pages of notes and thinking, this is
Mm.
the best book maybe that's ever been written
Mm.
for sort of like uncracking the code for how do you live life to the full? Like, how do you live a
Wow.
life fulfilled? And particularly because Covey goes down this path of like everyone's going from they're dependent and they want to get independent, but ultimately it's about interdependence. And I was like, what does that really mean? And anyways, the age and stage was that was like a big part of the fascination for me. So to me, it was just the kind of reminder that the book didn't change. Like it's the same book, but I had changed. And the season I was in my life, that book is now a part of my annual reads and rereads. Same with How to Win Friends, Influence People.
Sure.
Read and reread. Why? Because to know and not to do is not to know. Like until
Ah,
you're
that's a good line.
applying that, right? You gotta, the only way it actually becomes informative to your life and the way that you live is when you start applying the lessons in a way that actually makes an impact in the connections. At the end of the day, the connections with humans is ultimately what's the highest value of what we can create in our life. So yeah, it's a part of my daily practice, but I also caution people that I don't think it needs to be. I think you should, for me, the four foundational pieces that are part of my daily practice are my faith, my spirituality, my connection to my creator, my family, which of course my wife, and as I introduced myself as I'm a husband, a father, but my kids are ultimately my true legacy. And that's really trite to say that. But if you think about it from the perspective that they're actually going to see years that you won't,
Right.
like Book of Proverbs says, your children are arrows you fire from your quiver into a future you'll never see.
Mm.
And so that truly, your ability to impact the trajectory of their life into the future, and then think about their kids, how they'll impact them. That is ultimately what is going to last beyond the time that you and I are
Right.
off this planet, right?
Right.
So my family, my fitness, I mean, early this morning, broke a sweat. It's a
Yep.
part of the ritual. Got to do that. Sweat every day. This is the one body you get. You don't get a redo of this. I've got some few pieces that are not moving as good as they used to. But what you've been given, make sure to take care of it. It's your house. It's the foundation. And then finances. And I always get a little bit of pushback on that. People say, well, money, it's the root of all evil. I'm like, no, no, no. First of all, it's the
Yeah.
love of money.
Right.
That's
Define
the
it
root,
right. Yeah.
not money itself. Money's neutral. It makes you more of who you really are, quite frankly. But I don't live to make blood, but I need blood to live. And I don't live to make money, but I need money to live. And it provides an ability for optionality and freedom, which I think is what everybody's craving. They want to be
Yes.
able to have a life of freedom to be able to do what they want, right?
Yeah. I love that so much. So you wrote a book,
Yeah.
which chronicles essentially the biggest lessons. I love how you phrased it. It's like what not to do versus what to do based on the lessons that you've learned. Um, for context, you built a mega business and sold it and had a great exit and all that was fine. And you had some ups and downs along the way. Um, if I'm not mistaken, Startup Santa discusses 10 business lessons. Yes.
It does. Yeah.
Um, for the sake of time, I would love for you to pick one or two of your favorite, maybe. And favorites, I get it. That's a funny word. One or two that come to mind, today, because there's going to be people in all spectrums of their entrepreneurial journey that are watching this. Some that are, in fact, in startup phase and in the middle of the grind and working to hustle, and hustle is the culture right now for what they need to do to get the rocket ship launched. There's other people who are well on their way and they're planning for exits and they're looking for, and the business is going well. Other people are post exit, maybe even. And they're just like, well, what do I do now? What are some, I know this is almost a legacy book in the sense where this is what I've learned along in my journey, but if you had to pick one or two of those lessons, what might they be and how would you explain them?
Yeah, look, so off the top of my head, let's first talk about the GI Joe. So every chapter, by the way, I introduce a toy, a classic
Yes.
iconic toy that people would know. I unpack some of the history of that toy, and then maybe some not obvious lessons that we can learn from that toy.
Yeah, I love that.
And so, first chapter is on GI Joes. Oh man, I'm so sorry I did not turn off my phone. Sorry.
No, we didn't
Um,
hear it. It's all good.
Okay, good. So GI Joes, I'm going to start over again. So the GI Joes,
I
they
loved
were
GI Joes when I was a kid. Yeah.
inspired by the GIs from World War II in Korea, who at the time were the heroes. They were the people who fought against tyranny, right? And so if you fast forward to today, who are those modern heroes? We would consider like the Navy SEALs or the
Sure.
Green Berets or something like that, elite units that we revere for their ability to execute. And the SEALs have a couple principles that inform the way that they operate in the field. And the first is advance, but protect the flanks. In other
Mm,
words, flanking maneuvers are almost how every military defeat in history has happened, is that, they advanced too quickly, they left their flank exposed, and they got attacked from behind. And this idea that in business, you need to grow. It's a part of what you're supposed to do. But when you grow a company, you're breaking a company. You're breaking three things. You're breaking the people, like the people that you have started with may not be the people you finish with, in
right.
fact, most
Right.
often the case, but reinventing your people, reinventing your cash, because growth requires cash and you need to like be ahead of that growth in terms of your balance sheet to support it. And the other piece of that, of course, is that, vanity metrics, make sure you're measuring the right thing because, top line's vanity, bottom line sanity, cash flow
Mm,
is reality. So let's
yeah.
ensure you actually have the right amount of cash. And then finally is the systems, which is, the best metaphor I can give for this is that when you think about it from a symphony perspective, you have a bunch of instruments sitting in the symphony and each one has potential. But until they're all coming together,
In
that's the
harmony.
only way that you create an orchestra sound. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of noise. If you go to a symphony at the beginning, it sounds like a bunch of noise, right? Until
Right.
they come together to create symphony. So
Right.
the processes and the systems are taking the people and the operation, allowing it to actually execute in a way that is consistently delivering repeatable value, which is what's scalable, right? So as you're developing your business, you have to be growing it and growing it, depending on your rate of growth, you have to be reinventing that so you don't leave yourself exposed to flank, which I did a couple times, right?
Makes
I grew
sense.
too quickly. I didn't think you could grow too fast. I
Right.
broke my
That's a real
companies
problem. Right.
by not being prepared to reinvent them along the way. So that's the first principle. The second principle that they unpack is slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And when you grow a company, you create a lot of frenetic energy in the company, which leads to frenetic decision making, which often means you have to do redecisions or
Mm,
perhaps decision fatigue or indecisions. And it is something that will hurt a business if you don't get it down to a way that, well, you'll get a lot of churn from people. You just need to manage it. So, anyways, those two principles from the
love that.
SEALs have to be applied, I think, into a business as you plan for your growth. And, I've been I've had 9 startups now. Almost every single one of them has had triple-digit growth at some point in its trajectory, and that's something I would say grateful for because, of course, that has a lot to do with timing, ready at the right time.
Mm,
But I will also tell you, as much as people want that and hope for that,
for
I'm
sure.
just going to tell you, creates a lot of chaos, and you have to be prepared to reinvent the business to keep up with it. So
Right.
that'd be the first kind of
I love that.
unpacking lesson in the book. It goes deeper, but those are just some top line stuff. Um, the second one that I would bring up is Etch a Sketch.
Love that too.
Etch a Sketch, right? It's a great toy.
Yeah.
It was actually invented by a French electrician. And when he initially took it to the Nuremberg Toy Fair, which is the largest toy fair in the world, he presented it as an inventor to the largest toy companies. And they looked at it and said, this is too complicated, these little knobs and little thing on the screen. And they said no. So
Yeah.
all the big toy companies said no. He found a small company called Ohio Art, and they took it on. And since then, they've sold over 100 million pieces. So obviously, a big mistake for Mattel and Hasbro.
Well, and even my kids now are using some version of it.
Of
Yeah.
course, yeah, it's iconic. It's one of those rare toys that's transcended time. There's not too many of them, but that's the book basically gives you a pretty good view of what those few rare toys are. What it teaches us, most important, this is something I've learned in my life, is that when you start off with your intentions and whatever it is you do, and this can be in business or this can be in relationships, ultimately you start to make a mess. You start to make mistakes. And if you ever play with an Etch a Sketch, that little knobs, it's hard to actually get lines to go where you want them to go. And wherever you get to, that impassable place, the great thing about Etch a Sketch, you
Mm,
can stop, shake it, and start again.
I love it.
So the idea that all endings are new beginnings. And so in my life, I've
Mm,
had, a couple bankruptcies. And as I look back at them, I now call them my inconvenient blessings because
mm,
if I hadn't had that, actually, I would have kept going on in that business.
right.
And the forcing function of that bankruptcy forced me to stop, reflect, choose again, design something better. And the resulting business on the other side of it was actually infinitely a better business than the initial business was that I wouldn't have experienced if I'd stayed in that initial business. And it's kind of gotten to this place that I found that often the best gifts come wrapped in ugly paper. Like it's ugly to go through bankruptcy. I don't recommend it.
Sure.
But man, on the other side of that, I was given a gift of starting again because endings are new beginnings. So
Mm,
Those are a couple I come off the top of my head. I mean, we can keep going, but
No,
those
I
are
love
good.
that. It's such a nice, like, I mean, it's just a nice little taster. We don't need to go too far into it because obviously I want people to buy the book. I mean, and outside of Amazon, is there anywhere else you'd like them to go to get the book, or is Amazon the best place at this point?
Amazon's the best place. There's the audiobook as well. So for
Yes,
all the usual platforms, Spotify or Audible or wherever you can do as well. And in fact, the audiobook, we did some bonus content between chapters where
that's right. I love that.
VJ, who you met, interviews
Yes.
me and we unpack even deeper lessons from the stories. And he asks a lot of great questions. So it's fun to go through it that way as well.
Perfect. So Startup Santa, Brad Pedersen, get the audio book at minimum, and then expand from there for sure. In the time that we have left, there's a couple things I'd just love for you to briefly touch on. I don't know if this is covered in the book itself, but there is most likely something to say about being a part of a group. I mean, we met at Mastermind Talks, which was, I mean, the industry lingo is a mastermind, but call it what it is. It's a gathering of people who are like-minded. And when you bring people together, magical things happen. And, the birth of a company that you're a part of and a whole bunch of other stuff. Obviously that's important. I don't think we need to emphasize the importance of that thing, but I'd love for you to talk about an initiative you're working on called Full Spectrum. Why are you doing it? What's the thought behind it? And what are your expectations and hopes out of it?
Yeah, great question. And thanks for asking. Look, I think as a founder who's been through high highs, low lows, ultimately got to an exit that is something I imagined. This was what I wanted in life. I want to get this place where I have this significant exit, which just gives me optionality and freedom.
Yes.
And I remember celebrating that when the zeros and ones hit our bank account. And within a very short period of time, ask myself, is this it? Is that all there
Mm,
is?
mm,
Is life about accumulation and consumption? Is that
mm,
really what we're striving for? And so, I think there's a bunch of people out there who you can tune into, who are going to teach you how to strive to a place of independence, right? How to build businesses. And like someone like Dan Martell, a good friend of ours, he's world class what he does. He coaches people like to get to a place where they get to independence.
right.
I wanted to think the level beyond that. Once you get to independence,
What
what does
next?
interdependence look like?
Right.
What does it look like to go from striving to truly thriving? And the way that I see it is that it's about making sure that the reason we came up with the name Full Spectrum, by the way, white light, which was the first thing called into creation, and it's the thing that gives life to everything.
Yes.
And we're called to be light. We're called to be light on this earth in the way we live our life. But if you break it down, it's actually got 9 different spectrums, it's 9 different colors that make up white light. It's not just white on its own. It requires the 9 different wavelengths to create that white light. And just like that, we believe that it's about developing your whole being. Whereas so many of us as founders get addicted to this idea that our being is based upon what we do or have. It's like, how could I accumulate more of this or how can I do more of these things? And that's who I am in the market. It's really about who do you become
Yeah.
across the entire spectrum of your life. And so Vijay and I spent a bunch of time going down the path of like understanding like how do we feel more fulfilled in the work that we do? How do we be good stewards of the resources we have, which isn't just financial, right? It's your leadership, it's your influence, your finance, and your expertise. So it's your entire life across the spectrum, right? And then finally, how do you build the deep connections with people who matter? Because we've been communicating like never before,
Mm,
but our lack of connection as humans is at an all-time low, which is part of like the paradox of our time, right? We
yeah.
actually have more abundance, more like if you go back 100 years and say this is the way the world's going to be, people would be like, wow,
No way.
utopia.
Yeah.
Like, look
Right.
at this. Yet we have more depression, more obesity, more addictions. I mean, we live in a time that just it's in paradox to what it should be relative to what's out there. So the basis of developing deep connections, and those deep connections are with you yourself, getting comfortable in your own skin, because I think all of us suffer from some form of the imposter syndrome.
Sure.
It's connections to those around you, and then ultimately connections with your creator. which I think it's the trifecta of how we do that. So we spend a bunch of time. It's a guided mastermind where we're working together. We've lived through some stuff so we can pass on our learnings, but it's about how do we inform each other as a community to live this life to the full, which makes up the full spectrum.
Yeah, I love that. I got two more quick questions if you're okay with it.
Yeah.
One is to speak to the nuance of this a little bit, and that is, you're in a phase right now. I don't want to make an assumption, so correct me if I'm wrong, but the first part of the business building phase and all that you're doing, and I know you're still very actively involved in some businesses as well as an advisor and a chairperson, but there was a season in your life where wealth building was the objective, right? Let's build, let's have these businesses, let's bring some stuff in. Now it feels like you're more in a quote unquote wealth preservation. I'm trying to use the terms of like the Tiger Group, right? It's like I've accumulated. Now the focus is less on the accumulation. It's how do we preserve and make the most of what we have here. I can only imagine that there's people watching who are kind of in that phase. Like I've built, maybe they've asked the question like you did, and like Fern and I did. It's like, when is enough enough? And then you get to this point where you realize, actually, I might have enough. What do we do on the preservation side? I know this is kind of a little bit of a turn, but can you share some just high level thoughts for people who are maybe at the place of the building's done, now it's maximization, preservation, consideration, and all that in life? What is the one or two pieces of advice in that space?
Yeah. Well, the first rule of money is to have some.
Sure. Can't do much if you don't have it. Yeah.
The second rule is don't lose it.
Yes.
And most post-exit founders, there is a stat that something like 20% of their wealth is lost in the beginning because of just stupid things they do. They spend it on dumb things, they make dumb investments, and they fritter it away. So, part of the reason that we joined, or Kelly, who's my wife and partner, joined Tiger 21 was to learn from other people, this idea of like a mastermind. How do you be a good steward of the resources that you've accumulated?
Right.
And so, yeah, I think, we're very careful about it from the perspective of the easiest thing to do. It's really hard making money. It's actually, challenging to actually get to a place where you get to an exit. It's a rare air experience.
Right.
Like the stats on that are super rare. So, and once you have it, how do you ensure that you don't lose it? Because it's really easy to spend money. And you hear the stats of the Mike Tysons, although he recently probably replenished his accounts, but
a little bit.
how do you lose
Now
that?
you can focus on preservation again.
$500 million though, gone. Like, there's not enough money in the world for stupid spending. So, so I think we're mindful of that. But I would also say that, we think about it from the perspective of stewardship, that we're temporary. We're not taking it with us. Like this is not for us. And unfortunately, part of our, again, back to what motivates us as humans, hope and fear, the scarcity mindset is I don't have enough. Even though you know you have enough, your mind is still like, I need more.
Is it enough? Yeah.
Right. Recent study, they actually asked entrepreneurs ranging from 7 figures to 10-figure businesses, how much would they need to feel like they're secure? And every single answer is the same: twice what I have now.
Wow.
So it's crazy that, because the truth is it is not how much you have, it's how much you keep. And, adjusting your life, your haves divided by your wants. And also realizing that the more you own, the more you grow. It's because stuff weighs. It actually causes mental friction in your mind. So anyways, people are going to have to discover on their own journey what's right for them. There's no prescription. But what I would say is that, money is an incredible tool and can be a force for good in your ability to create freedom for you and your family and life design, but also for others. And the scarcity mindset is what I want to warn people from getting into, but I don't have enough, I'm preserving it, and get into a generosity. Because honestly, one of the greatest rewards in life is giving. It's part of, and it can be money, but it's also your time. And it's one of the reasons that I put on these bike events and we host parties and stuff like that, because we want to be generous with our abundance and show that we care for people. Most people use people to accumulate things. I'm a big believer in use your things to build relationships with people, right? And I think there's more joy in life in doing that.
Yeah, I love that. I think Derek Sivers just wrote a blog post, something along the lines of what you said. I'm going to butcher this, so I apologize in advance, of wants divided by needs, or what you have. Ultimately, the perspective is you can you can condense down the negative feeling you have about that which you don't have by reducing the wants and understanding, hey, in perspective, I have everything I need and everything else is just a want. And pursuing it or not is a different whole question altogether, but it was a fresh perspective. One last question on that, and then we'll bring it to a close. Total side note. What is something you bought in the last 6 months that you absolutely love and you have to just share with the world about?
6 months.
Or year, like something a recent purchase in the last, let's call it a year or whatever, that what you just absolutely love and you can't not tell people about.
I mean, to me, the obvious one is my Shocks headphones. They're conductive, right? The ones that wrap over your ears.
Oh, yeah.
I love them. I'm a huge evangelist for those things wherever I go. People ask me like, are those good? I'm like, they're game changer for somebody like me who's extra sweaty, and I've broken a bunch of headphones because they're sweaty, and also ones that in your ears fall off because I'm sweaty.
Yes.
The fact they go over your ears and they conduct through your bones, and you can still have a conversation with people, and or when you're running, you can hear cars, so you're never surprised, that kind of stuff. So as you can tell, I'm a big fan.
Yes.
I'm advertising it to you. I love them.
I love that. I think I might have to look into that. And the sound is just as good from a sound experience, an audio experience.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's not going to be, it's not the same as like the noise canceling experience, but it's every bit that you need to get. If you like to listen to podcasts when you run or exercise or whatever you do, then it's perfect for that.
Awesome. Everyone look into that. Okay, I got one last question, but before we ask that question, where's the best place for people to go to learn more about the book? Obviously, you can go to Amazon and whatnot, about Full Spectrum, about what you do, how you do it, all that. Where's the best place you can point them to?
Yeah, a couple things. I would say you can go to my website, which is bradpedersen.com, and you spell Pedersen with D's as in Delta and E's as in Echo. So most people, they go, "Whoa, you're not Swedish." No, that's the Danish version. So it's bradpedersen.com. Fullspectrumlife.com. If you find that you're at that place in life where you've been striving, and you maybe even continue to strive, even though you've developed a lot of means, but maybe now you're missing the meaning behind it. I think you could be interested in understanding how we're going to flip that idea on its head just based upon the things that we're going to unpack with frameworks and models that we've been working on. So fullspectrumlife.com. You can learn more. Actually, there's a wait list that we're building. We're going to have small cohorts, not big groups, because we want this to be very personalized, and it's going to include adventure because me, I want to make sure there's some adventure involved. So it's in person, learning, growing together, and sharing how we can continue to be the best and brightest version of ourselves. If we want to be that light, this is how we do it.
I love it. So closing this, how I close every podcast. I want you to pretend that you're at an awards banquet, similar to the Oscars or the Emmys, and you're being handed a Lifetime Achievement Award for everything you've accomplished up until this point. What I want to know is, who do you thank and why? And beyond family, obviously, my wife and kids, yes, for sure. Because without them, we wouldn't be who we are. But beyond the family, when that microphone comes up and you have 45 seconds to thank the people who've had the greatest impact on the lifetime achievements that you have achieved, who might those people be and why?
Look, I would thank my father, who's passed away. And for me, he was my hero. Still the person that I look up to. I've actually got a sort of a rotating picture frame across here where I see pictures of us doing life together, and it's a great reminder. And I ask myself often, what would Dad do? He was just such an incredible inspiration, the way he lived his life. And I mean, I am who I am today because I've wanted to make my dad proud, and I still do. And
love that.
I owe a lot to him.
Well, thank you, everybody. We've been talking to Brad Pedersen. Remember, you only have so many hours in a day, so let's stop wasting them and focus on what matters most, and that is the bottom line. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Bottom Line Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.